All right, it's 7 o'clock. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Kelly, would you call the roll?
Jim Donda, James Shiloh,
Here.
Christian Cockle, Michael DeVito,
Here.
Beth Marie Evans,
Here.
Alex Grados,
Here.
Eric Jones,
Present.
the quorum is present.
Are there any changes to the agenda as proposed? Seeing no changes?
Do we have on the agenda talking about the transfer tax and the possibility of removing it?
That's not on this agenda at this current point in time.
Okay. When is it appropriate to suggest that that be on the agenda?
You can suggest that at any point, and then we can make modifications or changes to an agenda at any point.
Okay.
Yeah. So, are there any changes to the agenda?
I would like that added
Okay.
to discuss the possibility of voting down the transfer tax simply because it's no longer being used for what it was originally intended for, which is for the Heron Creek subdivision.
So
Now it's being used for commercial properties and other things that it wasn't originally intended for.
So we could add it to this agenda as an
Okay.
informational item. The only thing would be if we did put it on, I don't know that there's enough information maybe that we have from the admin to talk in a, we'll say, informed fashion, so it might be a better future agenda item. Did you still want to add it to this agenda? Or did
We
you
could
want?
add it, and then if it's decided it needs to be future, then we can push
Okay.
it forward.
So Beth, you're proposing adding the discussion of the transfer tax to this agenda. Is there a motion to approve the amended agenda as proposed?
So moved.
All right, there's a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Do we have to know where it's going on?
We could restate the motion to be more specific. I was just going to put it at the very back end of the agenda, right before open discussion and future agenda items. I think that would be appropriate. Is that okay? Yeah. Okay, so we have a motion, we have a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, so we've amended the agenda. You're testing my Robert's rules. So-
I'm trying to learn them too. I still have a little book you gave me.
Yeah, so, all right. So
I
we've
probably
got-
should have said, I file a motion. No.
No, you're
Bring forth
great.
a motion.
Don't worry about it, you're fine.
All right.
Okay, so we've got that. Then is there a motion to approve the consent agenda as proposed?
So moved.
There's a motion.
Second.
And a second. Can we do a roll call?
Shiloh,
Yes.
Evans,
Yes.
Grados,
Yes.
Jones,
Yes.
DeVito,
Yes.
motion carried.
Is there a motion to approve the NIA consent agenda as proposed?
So moved.
Seconded.
Moved and seconded. Roll call?
Evans,
Yes.
Grados,
Yes.
Jones,
Yes.
Shiloh,
Yes.
DeVito,
Yes.
motion carried.
All right, the next item on the agenda is audience to visitors. If there's anyone from the audience who would like to address the board at this time, you'll be allotted 3 minutes. You'll have to state your full name and address per our board policy. Is there anyone from the audience? Seeing no one from the audience, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, communications, correspondence, and informational items. So all of those are included in the board packet. There was a FOIA report. There were no FOIA requests. Committee reports. Is there anyone on the board who would like to make a committee report at this time?
If anyone's not Michael or I, I'd like to get one that might be.
There's been no activity on any of my committees this month.
All right.
SEF met on the 22nd. The biggest item for that agenda was that Rachel Sauber is coming back as the executive director. So definitely a positive there. She did a great job in that role. So they just kind of the framework of her role changed a little bit, but definitely great to have her back in that position. And then Michelle Ibarra, her term as chair expired, and Todd Madden is the new chair. So probably the two biggest things, and obviously, just because we're only meeting, our next meeting is probably late August, I don't have the date. Take Root fundraiser coming up on the 14th of September. September, yes. So just to put that out there, so if you're looking for something fun to do, go to Take Root.
It's an 80s theme too. So.
80s themed, yes, you are
Oh,
right,
man.
I should have said that.
Oh, yeah, I should go.
Thanks, James. Yeah. Alex?
All right. If no one else has a report, I guess I can begin with the updated PowerPoint that I sent to all of you guys. If you'd like to pull it up, if possible, that might be.
And you did such a nice job.
Thanks. Sorry, I forgot to print it, so we can't pass it out or anything. But hopefully you all can see it. If not, if anyone needs additional information, just feel free to ask. I'm happy to provide anything you need. So I'll start, and then Michael will finish up. So I'll start with the report changes portion. This is sort of just a follow through on the previous committee report that Michael and I gave, but since that time, Superintendent Michael and I got together and sort of finalized the changes we'd like to see on both the reports and the committee structure. So the first report change is the financial report, and I broke it down so we can see what's currently seeing the treasurer's report, revenue and expense, comparison, 5CAST, a yield curve, investment, corporate, personal, property replacement, land cash payments, enrollments, health plan. Michael and I talked extensively about this report particularly to try to whittle it down to stuff that's most pertinent to action that the board takes. So going forward, we'd like to only see the treasurer's report, and then per 105 ILCS 5, a reconciliation of cash investments. That was just sort of cleaning up a more recent legislation change to see that reconciliation. And then a revenue and expense comparison in numerical format as opposed to the 5CAST graphs. We've had some talk about that, and those are sort of tedious to make, and we just didn't think they added a ton of value. It's something a little simpler. Something else we'd like to see is an explanation of what these reports are, especially for new board members, which you might see in the spring. That could be helpful so people know what they're looking at. A little background is always nice. Update the payroll and wages report to include payroll, or I guess wages for every district employee as opposed to just administrators and teachers. And then if there's anything else that comes up, we were going to research that. I haven't found anything else. I think we're set, but I'm not sure if there's anything else. Okay.
No.
The second report would be the personnel report. This is a much more minor change. It would just include the compensation or the expected compensation for the personnel, and then an indication of if it's a replacement for an existing position in the district or if it's a new position that's been created. I sort of touched on the annual compensation report earlier. Then this is a new report we've been discussing as a board for a while now, and that would be a capital improvement plan. We're thinking a 5-year plan is sort of the gold standard that would show a budget for each building for repairs and maintenance that are needed. In addition to that, something that we've been talking about would be a long-term facilities plan, and this would be helpful for making decisions such as the one we're making tonight, where we're talking about long-term financial planning and meeting needs of facilities, over 20 years or so. This sort of 20 years seems to be the benchmark for what a long-term facilities plan is. So sort of determining what enrollment will be in the future and what maintenance will be required in the future is something we've been talking about as a board, and just having that in a report that the board can see an update on and the community can see might be or would be beneficial. And then the other report that we've talked about would be a strategic plan report that we'd review probably every 6 months. Currently that doesn't exist, but we just had our strategic plan presentation, I believe, at the previous meeting. So sort of getting a report based on that plan and seeing how the district is tracking in terms of completion and progress would be, is something that is important for the board and the community to see. So, our ask at this meeting, is just to come to consensus and direct administration to make these new reports. We don't need a formal vote. So I guess the best way I would like to do that is there anyone that's opposed to any of these changes or would like to modify something? That being, are we, like, thumbs up if we're okay to go forward?
As
That's
a,
kind
yeah, as a sort of impromptu straw poll.
Yeah.
I mean, okay.
We've had good, just so the rest of the board knows, I've had a good conversation with Michael and Alex about it. There will be, likely be some tweaking as we make some shifts to new reports, but I think in the long run, as long as that's what the board is looking for, we'll do our best to meet that, yeah.
How does this affect the administration's time? Like, how much time is gonna be required to adopt some of these changes or all of these changes?
I think that I don't want to put words in Nick's mouth, but I think the HR and the financial report will be pretty smooth. In fact, I was emailing with Michael and Alex already about the revised financial report. I've got got kind of a template to email you guys. I got that today, so I'll send that to Michael and Alex for them to look at. Facilities plan is going to take a little bit. You know, we've got a very comprehensive facility plan, but it's very detailed. And I think Alex's point is well made, is that it's not very digestible to the public. So taking that report and breaking things out in a fashion that the public can understand will take a little bit of time. But I also think that that's the sort of report that once it's developed, board sees it, board's happy with it, then it's a matter of just updating it over time. And as we go through 10-year life safety reviews and things like that, as new issues pop up, they can get added to the report and taken, and things accomplished taken off. So that'll take a little bit of time, but just to develop something brand new. And then moving forward, I think it's just a matter of updating it. I think all the other reports, changes are pretty reasonable.
Okay, I'll hand it over to you, Ryan.
All right, so the second section was the committee restructuring. We've kind of touched on this a couple of times. Jim was a part of this conversation at the very beginning, and at his authority, this subcommittee exists. As of current, these are pretty large changes to the way our board operates. I mean, pretty seismic changes. And so, much like the straw poll to the report, getting an idea of where the board feels these are, these reports or this committee restructuring would sit would be really valuable. To make these changes, there's some policy revisions that we would need to make. So we're talking about not doing anything tonight for that matter, but essentially modifying our board policy. At this point in time, having an idea of where this board feels we should as a district be going would be very helpful for me. It's not lost on me that there are 5 of us sitting here. And if, 2 of us weren't here, we wouldn't have a quorum, which 2 of us not attending a meeting isn't super uncommon. For that matter, if I wasn't here, we wouldn't have anybody to run the meeting. So I don't know, and that's not clearly outlined on what that procedure would look like. I don't have answers for this board on what is going to happen and where things lie with our board president. I've tried to get those answers, and I haven't been able to. So I guess what I would really like before, and as we kind of embark on this really seismic restructuring the way our board operates, and I say seismic because these are changes that essentially haven't changed for 30 years. So just getting some idea from you guys on if I have your support, or if there is something you would like to see different, if there is some actionable step that you would like to see, a timeline. Are there any ideas?
I was sadly absent from the last meeting, so I'd love just a synopsis of the pros and cons, what your discussion may have been around options A and B, as far as sticking to the current structure or doing the committee board structure, and why we should or should not adopt one of those changes.
Okay, so a synopsis. And just so I can aggregate all of this so I don't.
Yep.
Is there anything else, Stu? Anyone else have any comments?
Well, I noticed that in some of the meetings, it would require 2 board meeting, or members being present. Is that just for certain, that was something I read. And then just a little more clarification on that, because what if you can only get one person
Okay.
to come?
Gotcha.
That's the thing too, you know.
Yep. Board members?
That
Yeah,
was
and-
pretty straightforward.
Okay,
That's currently what we do. There's 2 board members that attend, committee meetings. Typically, the meetings that James attended would be considered a liaison position, where only one board member would attend. That stays the same. It's really the finance committee and maybe curriculum coordinating, if they meet, would currently have 2, and that would just stay constant.
okay, so that's gonna stay the same.
Yeah.
You know, like, the citizens advisory, it was just me usually.
Okay, then that would.
Or Michael was the alternate for that one. Is that gonna pretty much stay the same then?
It would be a liaison role.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it would just in the sense where that would still exist and that would still meet, and you would still attend and participate as you would, but it wouldn't be earmarked as a committee. So
Oh, I see.
that would be the
Okay.
only difference.
Okay,
But to your, in kind of stepstoning on what Alex was saying, while 3 members of the board could attend a meeting, only 1 member of the board would need to attend that
Oh,
subcommittee
okay.
meeting. Because no action at any point would be taken at those meetings, it would just be a public meeting. So all of these subcommittee meetings that are currently not public would become public. That's just what the 3 board members, so any number of board members could attend any meeting. But at a minimum, 1 would need to.
Our thinking was if there's only 1 out of the 7 that can attend, it might be worth rescheduling.
Yeah.
That was sort of what that's for.
oh, okay.
And I guess other comments or questions just before I dive into kind of Eric's question, which I think is the greater point, which will be a synopsis of this. Anything else?
It's, since I haven't been on the board that long, you know, being a newer board member, it's kind of hard for me to be affected by something that was there 30 years when I didn't even really have that much experience with it anyway. So, yeah, probably Eric and James would be the better to ask those questions.
And I asked some questions in the last meeting, but I don't have anything new or anything. I think it's pretty well outlined in here. I think there is a lot in here, and I think it can be overwhelming if you just try to look at it and make sense of it. So I guess to Eric's point, I totally get like getting an understanding of it, but like, no, I didn't have any questions. I think a lot of it is just kind of reframing the word committee and a liaison position and what that really means. I think from my standpoint at least.
Exactly. And diving now kind of, Eric, into your question, which is where I'm hoping to go next, what this really is. So why this is so drastic, or I should say just a big change from where we were at, is because a lot of this work that was held by the role of the president is now going to be spread to chairs of these subcommittees. So these subcommittees that will exist that we've described would have a chair self-voted by that subcommittee. So by your willingness to want to be on that subcommittee, when you organize, you would decide who would chair that meeting at any given point in time, and subsequently set that agenda in advance of that time, cover the topics that you'd want to cover related to information collection and potential direction you believe the board should go in. And then you would bring those pieces of information back to our once a month primary board meeting for review, consideration, and action. And so that's, right now, the way it's set up is a little different, but I guess going into just the option A and option B. So the purpose, again, to determine which committees facilitate board work and which are for representation. So again, board work, right now we meet as a committee of the whole. So the work that our board does together happens at these meetings, which can mean things move a little bit slower, just by virtue of having many people. So then representation, those liaison roles where the board should attend and be a part of them, much like the advisory council Beth had described, or like just naming a few others like music boosters. These are roles where we should have a presence, the community should know that we're concerned to hear about these issues, but we're not actively doing board work at these meetings that leads to board action at these primary meetings. So anyway, so the representative positions, moving several items to representative positions, so city planning commission, liaison rep, we would have a IASB, that would be a liaison position. We would eliminate the inactive committees that don't currently meet, so that list is in that email, in that PDF. So as far as administration participation, it would be helpful if these new subcommittees had administrative participation. They wouldn't meet so frequently that it would become burdensome, and the schedules would be planned out well in advance. But their input would be critical to driving those recommendations that subcommittee brings to the primary board. So the following standing board committees would exist, and this is what, again, using some language from our board policy, a standing board committee. So Beth, you had mentioned interest in having like a teaching and learning, I think I heard.
What I was thinking about, I think it would be very helpful if somehow we could have a committee where parents get more involved in their children's education, such as from K through 12. 12, it's obviously just making sure they do their homework and that they're reading. Because I noticed at one of our town halls, someone was complaining that they only had 20 minutes of reading in the library. And when I grew up, I read at home a lot. So I don't know if kids aren't reading at home anymore or what the problem is. I thought 20 minutes should be enough time to check a book out, I would think, anyway. And so I talked to one teacher that said there's like at least 100 words kids should learn by the time they're even 3 or 4 years old, even before they come in school. So it would just be a committee to encourage, like, obviously, it might move really slow, but just to get the idea out there, even when your kids are like preschool age, teaching them their ABCs. My little great-granddaughter can already count to 10, and she's not 2 yet. So they can really learn at that age. So I would just like to have a committee to encourage parents to be more involved and not just dump everything on the school and the teachers who are only with them maybe 8 hours a day or less.
So, and again, like, kind of getting to your point, absolutely. So some of those concerns and like those ideas that you're describing, they could take the form of two things. They could, one, fall under the umbrella of the Learning and Teaching Standing Committee. So that would be, again, because you're, by virtue of being a board member, you would have a seat at that table when that committee meets. You could propose agenda items, suggest items to be researched at the consensus of that committee. Or if it was something that was more specific and would fall outside of the auspice of Learning and Teaching, an ad hoc committee, much like what Alex and I are on right now, which serves a very specific purpose and then dissolves after that purpose is fulfilled. So kind of utilizing these already existing policy constraints for committees would be valuable to address, like what you've described. Teaching and Learning was the first of the standing committees that would exist. Human Resources, Business Services, and then Policy Committee. And the meeting for Teaching and Learning, we had proposed quarterly, Human Resources biannually, Business Services could be monthly until otherwise seen, and that would be something that, again, as needed. So the schedule would be set. You'd have an initial gauging meeting to see what was needed, and then from there it would be okay as needed, and that public schedule would be posted. And then Policy Committee, we already have, it exists, and that again would continue to meet quarterly. But now, rather than it being something that I and Jim participate in, everyone on the board could, if they wanted to, sit in on that Policy Committee meeting. We wouldn't, again, take board action at that meeting. We would just be doing what we do, consult, review, and then bring a recommendation to the primary meeting.
And that's a public meeting?
That becomes a public meeting, so everyone would have access to that in the public. They would see everything that's happening in those subcommittees that I've described.
Posted does it have to be posted?
Exact same as this.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So,
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
Do you envision those meetings happening during the day?
no, I would see those meetings taking the place of what we were once doing. So we were doing those 2 meetings a month on the, like this evening, like we would have normally a second meeting. I would see these meetings taking the place of what that original meeting was.
Okay.
So we'd go back to essentially meeting twice a month, something to that effect. So it wouldn't need to meet in the evening. Again, this is where the control would fall to the chair for the scheduling and for the times, but it would be public in that nature, so.
But if you and Eric were the chair and the vice chair of the policy committee, let's just say.
Sure.
I could come or I could not come
Exactly.
in my role. You
Yep.
two are gonna be there, you're gonna
Yep.
talk about the policies, the same thing that's going on right now.
Yep,
Like,
exactly. Exact same
Jim
thing.
and Steve for all those years.
Yeah.
Like, but it's in the public, I could come, I could hear what's going on, if there's
Or
some
not
hot
come and see
topic.
the minutes.
Correct,
Yeah.
yeah, because minutes will be posted.
Exactly.
Sure.
And you'd be allowed to opine in if you had any thoughts.
Opinions.
It's
Sure.
not just sit there, I mean, the public it would be the same, the public, they're an audience, but the
Mhm.
board, it would be a little more of a dynamic.
But the board could sit up, I mean,
We'd sit
Yeah,
like this and you
yeah.
could share, yeah.
So the
it
main
would just be-
difference is as many people can come as they want, whereas right now we're
Yes.
limited to two, because it's
Correct.
not an open.
Mhm.
Exactly. Yep. So committee membership. So right now, the
Can
board
we-
president,
Sorry, can we stay on the standing committees just for a second? Just
Sure.
'cause I'm not clear where finance and technology fall amongst those four.
Yep, so I would say technology would likely fall under teaching and learning, and finance under business services.
Okay.
And technology, I think could also be split at times. As
Right.
part of what we do with technology is the learning and teaching part, right, the computers and technology in the classrooms. But the infrastructure piece is kind of a facilities or an operational, so I could see it popping up in both of those committees.
That's a good question. Where does facilities fall? Is that business services?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
And again, it's important to note that these committees wouldn't meet if there wasn't an agenda to discuss. So while some of these committees may have recurring issues or recurring topics that would require a meeting, the main purpose would be for board work to occur at these meetings. So it'd be, there's a set agenda with items to cover, and that would essentially lead to an outcome, a recommendation. And that recommendation would need to be actionable at this meeting. So having an informational update would be valuable, but that would likely find its way into a board memo, which I'll get to as a later item. But ultimately, what would be happening in those subcommittee meetings would be a recommendation for a revision to the way the board or the district operates. Okay, committee membership. Right now, the board president appoints all committees, so that would go away. The board president would not be able to appoint committees, they would be self-appointed. So if you wanted, like I said, to attend this, and as far as like, James, you had mentioned, like, Michael, if you're chair and Eric's co-chair of policy committee, that determination of to be a chair or co-chair would be self-imposed determination worked out and about by that standing committee.
where there's no volunteers.
Well, if there isn't, then the board president, and this is why I was saying
Sure.
like the direction of our board would be really important, because the board president would need to hold those standing committees accountable.
Mhm.
So there's some work required of the board president to keep those agendas focused, to make sure that there is in fact work being done at those board meetings and presented. Which is why, again, having some idea from the board on how you feel about this kind of, me as your acting president, making these suggestions. We're now 4-ish months in, so that's not lost on me. Okay, so no quorum is needed for these committee meetings. Okay, so the board president's current role, because I'm just the acting board president, just to be clear, at this meeting. So the board president would appoint ad hoc committees and statutorily required committees, such as the Parent-Teacher Advisory Committee and Behavioral Interventions, and the board president would still appoint the representative or liaison positions. Learning and teaching, human resources, business services, all volunteer self-elected. Okay. So then in terms of the policy update, we would update policy 2150 to include the bolded text from press. So the language coincidentally happens to already exist, because this is not something that's nuanced to us. This is, other boards do this. It's a subcommittee structure. There'd be some changes that would be specific to our district regarding the exact nature of those committees, but we'd be utilizing press language, and so that policy would be brought forward to you guys. The reasoning you can see on this, but leverage expertise and interest, clear structure and accountability. It, I think, would be more valuable just to have us in smaller groups. Like having 7 board members at one of these subcommittee meetings could happen. Do I think it would be as productive as having fewer board members there? Well, that would depend entirely on the agenda and who is running that meeting. But my hope is that it will allow more actionable items to come before the board at these meetings, and less informational being discussed here. So that is the option A. That's what Alex and I are proposing. There's a more mild option B that I can go into more detail on if you'd like, but I'm encouraging us to look at option A. So going on to the following slide, and I won't drone on and on about this. But just again, reemphasizing the point that we're gonna be doing board work at these subcommittee meetings, and then we would be taking actionable steps at these meetings. So the next step on moving forward with this would be getting a straw poll from this group on how they feel, given our current board leadership situation moving forward. Because what that next step would look like would be a proposed policy revision and action. And if the board does not want to move forward, if you could give me some idea of constraints or timelines or expectations you have. Because right now, again, if I don't show up, then we've got to figure out what happens with the board. So, questions, comments, concerns, and your opinions?
It seems like there would be like a lot of room for tweaking, right? Like if this isn't working real great, we can change it.
Absolutely.
Like even with any of the, committees,
Yep.
like even the layouts and committees.
Absolutely. Yeah, nothing's definitive.
So,
It all
which I
changes.
think is a good thing, since we're not voting on anything anyway, in that way.
We would be potentially at the next meeting.
Well, I'm talking about if this, goes through and voted in, and one of the committees isn't working out so well, and we need to change it a little bit, we're open to changing, the structure of the meetings.
This board, you guys, you are the decision makers, right? The only thing that I do is facilitate a meeting, or the only thing I should say that whoever is acting as the board president does is facilitate discussion, and at a greater level, guide where our board is going by setting the agendas. So setting the agendas is something that is also the responsibility of the acting board president, and so that's where I'm kind of going. To your point, Beth, like if something isn't working, that's something where the board president would need to know that, see that, and then address that with a future agenda item or action or discussion, but has the same level of control and power that you do, so.
Well, it's definitely a good idea to get rid of some of the committees that haven't met in years. It's definitely, and yet, I see you guys did a lot of hard work on this too, so thank you.
It was really Alex, I'm just the show, I just do the talk.
I'm curious what problem we're trying to solve.
Yeah.
If you could summarize that.
Put me on the spot. I'll try to say this as tactfully as I possibly can. I would like our board to take action at these meetings, or not meet, one or the other. And I made that pretty clear when we went to one meeting a month, because I feel that what our objective should be as a board is to, where needed, take action and empower our learners to succeed in their world. Us having informational updates here and being responsive, while helpful and nice, it doesn't do anything. We don't make actionable steps. And then we come to these points where we're going, okay, we're gonna discuss a sales tax change, and we go, how does this fit into the larger picture of what our board is trying to do? And so for me, the driving motivator to this is I'd like to be able to look back on a year done and say, at these committees of the whole where we meet, we have done a motion, a second, and taken action on items rather than just review informational items. And to get those action items, we need think tank groups to bring those forward with the collaboration of administration, so that way we as a board can properly vet them with the community to make sure that, again, we're representing our stakeholders. So that's the objective, big picture.
Sure, no argument there. How does the current structure not support that?
Right now, if you wanted to get something on the agenda, you would need to email the board president, and at the will of the board president, it would go on the agenda.
How does that change in this? This isn't talking about our main meetings, this is talking about the committee meetings, so how does the main meeting change?
Right, so if you wanted to make a change to something that was on the agenda or something that the board was talking about, you would participate in one of those subcommittee meetings where it would be flushed out, worked, and exhausted until it was distilled to a presentable idea to the board to actually take action on.
But that still has to go through the board president to get on
Not
the
under
agenda.
this, so the board president wouldn't be able to say no to something like that.
How does it get on the main meeting agenda?
At the will of that subcommittee. Right now, it says the president in the policy says the president may add something to an agenda. So the president has sole discretion to add or not add something. Under this revision, it would be not up to the
That
president.
still seems like a minor point in what is a larger, are we going to this official subcommittee or committee of the whole? Changing one line to say the board president doesn't have the power to deny an agenda request seems like a different topic of consideration. So my concern, generally speaking, is I'm not sure that just taking this approach solves any of the problems that I perceive exist
No,
right now.
it definitely doesn't.
The main problem, if you want to call it a problem, is that if more than 2 people want to be involved in a committee meeting, they can. But that's also a small change because we could make any of those an open meeting through arbitrary decision as well, as long as it's posted and handled by the office. I'm more concerned that the frequency that in order for those subcommittee meetings to be effective, they have to be led, in my opinion, by an administrative person. Because they are the ones that have the insight on the things we need to do. Maybe we as a board come up with a topic that, okay, well now that's driving the direction of this next meeting. But some of these things that are recurring issues that the board needs to decide on, allocation of resources, curriculum, et cetera, those are all driven by the administration. And so they're the ones that really have to set the agenda and frequency of those meetings to say, hey, something's coming up, we need board input.
So you're
'Cause I'm not gonna be able to sit here in a meeting and go, you know what, I think, gosh, we haven't reviewed the English curriculum in a while, I should call that subcommittee and make an agenda, because I won't know that stuff.
No, you're absolutely right. So Appendix B of the IASB, is it coming to order edition they have here, has a annual calendar that board members would ultimately access. And there are items that are to be accomplished on this annual calendar. For example, in March, we're to go through the superintendent evaluation process, which we're doing now, today, at this meeting. So it is August, July, so that was for March. So to solve a problem, that was happening, should have been happening in March, it's happening now. There are, per month,
That doesn't fall under any
Guidelines.
committees, does it? Is that human resources?
so yeah, it could, right. And ultimately, like, these items that are on the district's calendar for items that every school board should be going through, a punch list, more or less, of items that we're supposed to cover, like when we talk about our budget hearing, or when we talk about our tax levy, or when we talk about union negotiations. These are all things that have timetables. These are posted. You don't have to know these. They don't have to be guided by administration. It's helpful if they are, but it doesn't have to be, because they're all posted publicly. What would happen is this calendar, this is the next step that would need to happen, is this calendar would have these responsibilities that our board is supposed to be doing, but currently isn't, and would dole them out to these subcommittees, rather than fall solely on the responsibility of the board president, which, as of current, has been absent for 4 months. So the issue, or the problem, more or less, Eric, is that we're not getting things done that we're supposed to be getting things done on. And that's where I'm trying to be tactful in saying this. But it is frustrating because I'm the person who is having to essentially be the acting president. And I'm looking at these and I'm going, okay, did we receive and review the tentative budget for the new fiscal year and assumptions on which it is based? Did we approve textbooks based on staff recommendations? Did we conduct an annual planning meeting to set a yearly agenda? These are all things we should have done this month. It's July 30th, we haven't done these. Did we review and monitor compliance with board policies governing curriculum and instruction? So these are things that those subcommittees could be doing. There are a long list of them, so it's all best practice. But does that kind of answer your question?
It tells me what we should be doing. It doesn't necessarily help me understand that one of these approaches is going to be more effective than the other. Because in one instance, we're basically saying, well, the responsibility for those things to get done falls on the board president. And in the other, we're saying, well, we've created a bunch of groups and hopefully the people in charge of those groups get it done, and we've taken a divide and conquer, but that also means we now have 5 potential failure points instead of 1. So if we're trying to figure out who's in charge this month of that subcommittee meeting, now we gotta go see, well, who's the current chair? Well, maybe the chair's not gonna be there, I gotta check with the sub-chair. Is everyone gonna be at this meeting? I don't know, we don't even know when the meeting's gonna happen. It may get called, it may not get called. If they meet, come together with some recommendation, then come to the board meeting 2 weeks later and make a recommendation, and we don't like it as a whole board, now it's gotta go back to that subcommittee that may meet another month or 2 later. Like, I'm just worried about mechanically how this all works.
Right now, if we administered it like you were describing, the board, rather than having these subcommittees work on these items and then converge for one meeting, every single board meeting that we would have to tackle every single one of these issues. And the amount of time that would take to do well would be probably more than most people would be willing to sit in on. And yes, it's not lost on me that having 5 working pieces would absolutely be more difficult than having one meeting once a month. But I think that we owe it to the public to do the harder path, because it is the path that allows us to be more thorough over these issues, rather than us converging as a committee of the whole and trying to cover and tackle all of these topics in just one committee meeting. So,
And what happens when there's a subcommittee that only one person wants to be involved in?
I mean, what happens when our board president doesn't show up for 4 months? Like,
There's
I can
6
tell
other
you what
people to pick up the
happens.
slack. My
to
question
all
is, you're
these-
talking about major decisions being made at a subcommittee level, not voted on, but discussion made, recommendations made, and that could be one person, it could be 2 people, and that we're not rehashing that out necessarily in an entire group meeting.
No, we are though.
Well, then how's time being saved? That's what I didn't
The
understand.
objective too is you need to have a good board member. We have good board members. We have board members who are diligent, who want to do work. It would be the expectation that if there was an item that was covered on a subcommittee meeting or a subcommittee level, even if one board member attended, if that item is now surfacing on an agenda for the committee of the whole, the expectation would be that you as a board member did your due diligence ahead of time, came to the meeting prepared with a concise action, which is where the way we currently do Robert's rules is we have discussion, then we have a motion and a second. The way Robert's rules call for is that there be a proposed motion, there be a proposed second, then there be discussion. And that discussion is limited traditionally to 2 votes per meeting, or 2 comments per person, and then a meeting is, or a motion is voted on. So right now, we get kind of down these digressive informational conversation pieces, and then we wind up not even making an actionable step. Again, a lot of things have to come together for this to work right. You're absolutely right, which is again kind of why I preface this with, where does the board see our leadership going? Because if Robert's rules aren't implemented, if there isn't a board leader who's going to hold these committees accountable, if we aren't willing to hold ourselves to this annual calendar, then yes, these subcommittees will not work. This will fail epically. But if the board has confidence that a new board leader can ultimately drive these issues home and bring this forward, well, then I think that we might actually have something here. So, and yeah, we could probably work it under the one committee structure, Eric. You're not wrong in that front. But if I'm gonna be going and administering these things, I think it would be more palpable for me and for future board leaders, hopefully, to be able to pick up the work that was left off if that was doled out and not concentrated in one spot. So we don't have a 4-month period where we are under an acting board president. That's a really, really bad situation to be in, because like when we waited for a board member, when we were looking to appoint a board member, which is to my point about the referendum for us having open elections, when we as a board have to wait to appoint board members, we're holding off on making decisions. We found ourselves in that situation when we had to appoint Christian, is we were in like a 60 to 70 day window where we're going as a board publicly, we should really wait till we have a full board to make those decisions. Well, I mean, we don't have a full board here tonight, and it doesn't look like that's gonna be changing anytime soon. So I'm trying to head on these problems, these apparently pretty present problems that our board has, so this doesn't happen again.
Yeah, and I said I agree with the problems and that there needs to be improvement in the effectiveness of these subcommittees. I just worry that going in a radically new direction, I'm not convinced that that's gonna improve the situation. I guess I'd like to look at other incremental pieces along the way first, personally, before making kind of this wholesale change, because it seems to me that this is all the things that the current subcommittee should be doing anyway, and so if we're not, there's a different reason that that's not being done, and it's not because we don't have a committee chairperson. So if minutes aren't being produced for these subcommittee meetings, if the subcommittees aren't meeting, I think we can address, or should look at why those things are failing, as opposed to scrapping this whole system and starting a new one. And I'm not against necessarily a lot of the things that this new system's gonna accomplish. I'm just not convinced in a tabular description that suddenly we make these changes in press policy and now poof, suddenly we're getting minutes and the board's 10 times more effective.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. There has to be follow through. So, yeah.
So I guess I'd like to understand, I think what would be helpful to me is if we had more of like a board admin retreat type session where we could actually talk about these areas of responsibility. What are these committees gonna touch on? What makes sense from a frequency? What are the administrators that are responsible for those areas? What's their feedback on? And collaborate and go through that list of here's the monthly calendar, and like together we should all be able to come up with a calendar and committee assignments and meeting frequencies, and is this gonna be a day meeting or a night meeting? How many people does it make sense to be on this subcommittee because of the types of content that needs to be covered? There may be areas where one person is fine to go to a subcommittee meeting on a topic, but maybe there's another that's so complex, finance or something else, where maybe 2 people's not gonna be enough to convince a 7-person board and feel like we've collaboratively made the best decision when really we relied on 2 people to make that decision for us. Those are my concerns with that. But I completely appreciate that a lot of this work is, I shouldn't say a lot of this work, some of these committees are meeting and there's not a lot of feedback from those meetings to the rest of the board, where we can objectively go out and see what was discussed. Okay, now I feel informed as a board member that when we take this vote, I'm not having to rehash the entire thing.
So,
Here.
so I understand you right, and I'm gonna try to parrot you, but basically, you would feel comfortable if we as a board had a meeting and discussed some of these changes more specifically and get meeting dates down, define outcomes, maybe proposed agendas for these subcommittees, for you to feel comfortable to support and endorse that as a path forward. Is that about right?
I think, yeah, I just need to, and I'm not sure even how to flesh out exactly what the main differences are between option A and B here, but I think I just need to, for
I'd
me
say
to support it, I
focus
just.
on option A, yeah, but no, I agree with you, Rick. I think we absolutely need to do what you're describing.
I mean,
But again, the only real difference for me between option A and B is that one's an open meeting and one isn't.
that's about, yeah, it's not a huge, I mean, I guess what, I think it was kind of overstated, the gravity of this change. The board will still meet just how we meet currently. This policy revision would hopefully, and it does depend on the will of the board, but it have an accountability measure to ensure that these subcommittees meet and that their meetings are productive, because those meetings will be open to the public and reports will be presented to the board. And if the report is not,
How does the press policy ensure that?
The press policy just restructures, because press outlines like subcommittee structures, so this would just allow for more than 2 board members.
Right, but it doesn't dictate that minutes are taken.
Open Meetings Act would.
Correct. So now who's in charge of each subcommittee meeting of putting the agenda together, taking minutes? Where does that information get stored and communicated?
So we're gonna have a presentation on board docs, and those minutes, and again, those things would be the responsibility of the chair of that meeting. So, and hopefully at the direction of the administration.
So the chair would have to take the minutes, the
no,
chair.
that would be
The chair would be responsible for making sure that the minutes were taken. Just like right now,
Mhm.
it's the chair's responsibility to make sure that the minutes are taken.
But are people coming to this meeting to take those minutes?
Yes.
It would be Kelly.
So-
It would be helpful that the
Well,
So
administration.
can Kelly come to
I-
every single meeting and ensure that she's there to take, like, these are just the logistics?
Yeah, my understanding was that it would be board members who take the minutes and create the reports.
Right, and
Well,
then,
then that becomes my other question here. That was where I was going, is that like, how does this information go from committee to board? Am I creating PowerPoints to present? Am I now a presenter here to the rest of the board so the rest of the board can make a decision? How often, you don't just want my PowerPoint at the meeting, you're gonna want it ahead of time and just all the logistics along with that. Like, what if I'm busy at work that week? Am I just cramming this till midnight to ensure that I got it to you a week ahead of time so you could review it? You're emailing me back on questions before the board meeting, it's just all those logistics.
I understand this is probably coming as a lot, because we haven't been doing any of these things on this calendar as a
Mhm.
board. Not saying they're not getting done, but we haven't been doing them as a board. So for me to say to you, cold turkey, hey guys, we have some stuff that we need to be doing as a board, it will be more work than you're doing right now. Absolutely. Because we should have been doing these things.
Are other boards putting together PowerPoints and
The
functioning? Like,
PowerPoint,
how does
you
that
definitely
work?
don't need to put together a
No,
PowerPoint.
that's not.
But if I'm solo at a meeting and something's coming up in 2 weeks at a board meeting, how am I getting that information to you guys?
You're solo at a board meeting.
I'm solo at one of these committee meetings, I'm sorry. We have a board meeting in 2 weeks. How am I logistically getting this information to you? Like
Say email probably would be acceptable.
I can't email all the board members,
Well,
right?
it would go on to, the administration would place it on board docs, similarly to the example.
So I would have to put something together, put some type of material together to articulate my point so that the board can look at it.
You'd
Those
have to-
questions are coming back to me,
I mean,
right?
the-
Oh,
Well,
exactly.
going to
You'd be
Steve to
making a
me.
more formal report,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, there would absolutely be more work going into the reports that would be coming out of these meetings than there is currently. I don't wanna say it as any other different way.
But it's not,
Absolutely.
it's not just, I mean, a lot of that would fall, that example would fall on me, but a lot of that's gonna have to be then through Steve or some medium, because I'm not emailing all the board members, and the board members, if the rest of the board is taking that meeting as seriously as I am, they're then digging into that prior to the board meeting, having an understanding of the material, asking for follow-up questions, which I'm gonna have to be responding to throughout the week, so that when we get to this meeting, we can logistically come to a functioning decision.
Absolutely,
Okay.
yeah.
Seems like a lot of work.
It's-
I would like, I
It's
would,
100% more work than we're doing right now.
yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a commitment I don't know if I can uphold, to be honest with you.
Understandable. So then I would just go to my original point, which is, how do we, as a board, move forward with August, which is putting a tentative budget on file for public inspection and approving that publication of public notice? When will we conduct a self-evaluation and review process policies to see that the board has been complying with its own rules? Is that going to fall on my shoulders then, as the acting president? Or should that fall on Jim's shoulders? Should we, so you see kind of like we're coming to head here.
Mhm.
There's a problem, there's a work problem here. So someone's got to do this work. And if it's going to fall on my shoulders, then I need direction from the board that I'm not going to do this work and put this time in, and it be for to be basically scrapped and moved in a different direction if there's a change. So that's where I'm looking to you guys. I came with an idea, right?
Mhm.
Alex and I, we worked out an idea.
100%.
I'm not married to it. Don't need to, again, Eric, your idea of kind of flushing this out, this is a board problem. This isn't my problem. And
Mhm.
this is not my solution or an Alex solution. This is our solution. So we have to come to peace with the fact that there are things that this board needs to do. And if, like I said, if I'm gonna sit here in this seat again next month, I gotta feel good knowing that we're doing those things. So how would you guys like me to do those things? Is kind of the first question I started with. Because this was my proposal with Alex, but if you guys have a different idea or approach, or if somebody can get a hold of Jim, be my guest.
I think we've talked in the past about putting together an annual calendar agenda. I know we had loose topics years ago, and that's kind of fallen away.
I think we still have that. I just don't know if it's in here too, is the issue.
But I mean, the easiest thing to do is just to put an agenda item on the next meeting where we review it, and if you're looking for volunteers to.
This
copy
is
it.
not my agenda. I did not approve this agenda that we're discussing right now.
I'm not talking about this agenda, I'm talking about the next agenda.
Right, so I need to know from the board if I have your authority to compose the next agenda. I need some direction here, guys. Because I'm not approving these agendas, or this agenda for that matter. I didn't approve this one. This came from Jim. So what do we do?
Jim gonna be here?
It's not here right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yet this agenda exists. So the agenda, as I mentioned earlier, sets the tone and the direction of our district. So, but this board has the control and authority as a unit of one to decide that. So you guys need to give me some direction here on how we're going to move forward with these duties, with these tasks, with these actions. Because if it's not gonna be this, like I said, I'm just looking for some opinions. And you guys have been great with that. I mean it genuinely, it's helpful to have feedback on this. Because again, this is not like this is what we need to do. If this is totally different direction, then guide me in the direction we want to go in. Like Eric, you said you wanted to meet maybe and flush out these ideas. I'm game. Or James, if you're like, let's put together a calendar, 100% and adhere to it. Like and not to say that we don't have a calendar. Again, we do. But then how are we going to administer it? Who is going to approve our agendas? Who is going to set these agendas?
I'm still confused as to how today's discussion affects any of the problems you've just brought up right now. I don't see anything in the bolded text here that makes any reference to meeting agendas or the board or the president. So how does us approving your recommendation to move forward today suddenly change
doesn't,
how the
because
next meeting's agenda gets put together?
You're spot on. So I definitely don't want your approval to move forward with a vote or anything to that effect. And what I absolutely would love is your guidance on how you'd like me to handle future agendas, which is why I'd say with this information, why I'm taking a straw poll, why we're not voting on this right now, why we're going, what does the board think? So I can go back and say, hey, we want this, the board wants us to set this agenda. This is what we're going to do. And I know I have you guys behind me. I need to know what that agenda should be. Because right now I'm not proposing a policy change. I'm looking for your support for direction on how we should as a district move forward. Because I'm not getting that support.
Well, then in that case, it sounds like board policy 2:220 is the thing that we need to make a change to.
What are you referring to?
That's the Board of Education meeting procedure, which says the board president is responsible for focusing the meeting agendas. Superintendent shall prepare agendas in consultation with the board president. So it would seem to me we need some legalese in there that says board president or his or her acting replacement, or something in there that allows that to not be a single point of failure if the board president can't be reached, or we need to find some other temporary means of changing board president or something else.
I agree. We need to do something. Is there any other, that's an idea?
But I guess I'd have to defer to legal on that, so.
I think it would be easy to add a clause like that authority goes to the vice president and fills in for the board president and
Right,
in the board
that's what I
president's
think.
absence. We followed 220 as it's written. And in all honesty, this is a very unique situation. In my 15 years, I've never seen an extended absence like this. And you know, for circumstances that are beyond Jim's control, just isn't able to be here. So, very out of the ordinary, but it has really left Michael in a tough spot. And Michael has been willing to step in. We've had a lot of communication about, you know, what his role is, how to do it effectively, and I've tried to, you know, provide as much guide. I'm not a board member, but try to advise, you know, as much as I can. It would be easy, I think it would be easy for us to get in touch with legal and just ask about updating that policy. I think a board admin retreat, and I don't know that the entire administrative team needs to be there, but maybe just a retreat where this is the only topic to hash through maybe some of the details, and it would provide everybody some time to kind of mull this over a little bit, but it might be an opportunity to hash through, you know, what some of the details will look like, meeting structures, dates, things like that, go through the calendar in a little bit more detail. That might be worth doing. It's ultimately the board's decision, not mine, but might be worth doing something like that. And in the meantime, we could get in touch with legal about adding, you know, ultimately it's a change in policy. You know, Michael's been through that process. It's a first reading, second reading. I don't know that it necessarily has to be 2 readings. I think it could be just done on 1 reading. But I would check that with legal as well. So a couple things to think about. Maybe before even a straw poll is taken. So I'll just throw those things out from my perspective.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, a collaborative meeting where we can come together and just kind of flesh out in a bit more detail than what the table describes there. What kind of meeting, what kind of subcommittees are really talking about, and what are their specific areas of responsibility as it pertains to that list of recommended board activities throughout the year, just so we have a clear understanding. Oh yeah, clearly that committee's only gonna meet once or twice a year. Oh, clearly that committee maybe has to meet monthly so we can understand what the time obligation is gonna be as people step into that role. And figure out whether, you know, who it makes sense to include in those agendas, because if we're placing a burden on anybody in the administration to be there in evenings or off their time, that's something that we have to be very respectful of as well. Or conversely, if like in our current setup, we're expecting board members to take time off of work during the middle of the day to meet in a committee meeting, because all the finance committees, for example, have been at like 10 or 11 in the morning. We should just have an awareness of that and the difficulties that will impose on the current board or future boards as we look to move forward in the system. But I completely agree with the goals and objectives laid out to address the hurdles that we all know that we're facing. Before I give you a straw man's vote on something, just want to understand a bit more what we're walking into, and does this make sense?
What does that timeline look like to you? What does that timeline look like for this board?
I'm ready to do it as soon as you want to go. As soon as we
I
can
was
find
hoping we
time
would be
to-
doing that now, is flushing out these ideas, talking about this, because that's why we're not voting on it. But we can do a special meeting earmarked specifically for addressing this problem, or I guess the future of the board and the subcommittee structure, if you guys think that would be valuable. I'm totally open to it. Again, none of this, the dates, the roles, this is an idea in concept. So, yeah, I agree, Eric. It should definitely be flushed out. We need more. Yeah. So, do you timeline-wise, what do you guys think that should look like? What are the next steps? Would you be opposed to a special
Steve,
board meeting?
No.
Could that be done pretty rapidly, you know, talking to the lawyer and getting that modified for Michael to take the role of the president?
Yeah, you know, what I heard Eric talk about was board policy 2220, he stipulates in the, you know, right now that the board president approves the agenda and that's it. You know, we prepare it. Kelly really prepares it. I take a look at it and then it goes to Jim. Adding a clause that allows the vice president to have that authority in the board president's absence, easy to do. But that clause is, I just want to be clear, that just pertains to the creation of the agenda. You know, board president has some other authority, so that would be something to think about. If there are any other policies or things that the board would like to consider, that may be another good topic of conversation, you know, like a special meeting, a board retreat.
Like how we would handle an extended absence. If you don't attend a certain number of meetings, you still hold the role of board president and those responsibilities and those signatory obligations and such. So, because right, so that in and of itself to me is an issue.
Right, it would seem to make sense where we're at right now that would be the first thing we would address before anything else, was giving him the legal authority to have the role of president in the absence of.
But doesn't he have that under 2110 right now?
Yeah, I mean, like, and
The
that's
vice president will perform the duties of the president if the president is absent or unable to perform the office's duties.
I think on a like
So
a
if
case
you've
by
sent an
case
email saying we need to put an agenda together and you don't get a response, what does it take to constitute absent?
Well, right, and then when an agenda goes out and then it gets approved, it becomes really murky, because now are these people participating? Are they not participating? That is the mystique that we're operating in. So, because if, again, like, let's say that agenda for this meeting went out and I approved it. Well, that becomes abundantly clear that, okay, well, this is what we're gonna do. But since I'm working under someone else's agenda, that was approved by somebody else, that puts me in an uncomfortable position where I'm going, okay, well, what's the direction that we should be taking as far as how we administer these subcommittee roles? Where will there be more insertions? So is the president absent? Is the president not absent? I haven't been able to get those answers. So I'm resorting to this, coming to you as a board and going, please give me some direction. And Alex and I came up with this as okay, well, this is something, but again, anything really at this point would be helpful.
But can't we just simply just say, Jim has missed a series of meetings, he has not been here, so until Jim comes back, we want to give you the authority to be able to set this agenda and approve it. Like, do we have the ability to do that? He's been missing for meetings, like, under the policy that Eric just read. Like, doesn't that constitute us enough right to just say, hey, look, you can approve the agenda that you have to execute? Because what I'm hearing you say is that you have to execute an agenda that you have no control over.
Right.
Sure.
And this
but-
has been a couple months in a row. Like, can I at least get some authority to where I can create an agenda?
And
Or,
I guess building on it, so yes to that point, but
Okay.
I guess the bigger concern is if, let's say, so the board to say something like that, then an issue comes up where, let's say, we are as a district discussing, say, a sales tax, right? Do we suspend that vote until we have full attendance, like we did with waiting for Christian to be on the board? What level of board precedent are we going to adhere to? What level of board accountability are we going to adhere to? What responsibilities fall on my shoulders while I'm working in tandem with a board president who's not communicating with me at all? And so that's where I'm going, like, I would like more than just an agenda authority, I would like very, very clear direction from the board on, am I working as an acting president, sort of alongside Jim when he occasionally sends an email? Or is the expectation that if there is not if our board president is not sitting in the seat, then that is that. And
Does the board have the authority to just, to approve a motion to replace the board president? Because the board sets the president, can we undo it and correct it?
I've never been through that process, to tell you the truth,
Just
so
to get something
couldn't,
done.
I couldn't give you that answer. And to kind of go back to, I think what you guys have talked about is, it's not just the agenda, right? It's a host of things, and again, most of the time when a board member misses a meeting, it's one, it's an illness, it's a work trip, it's a vacation, and it's something. An extended absence is really, creates a challenge when it's board president or even vice president, resigns, we've been through that on a couple of things. So those could also be questions that I pose to legal when we look at 2220. Our attorney has been around for a long time. He's seen a lot of things, and he may be able to not only provide legal guidance, but give us some suggestions on how boards have addressed this sort of issue. I don't know off the top of my head how the process, if the board wanted to take a new vote on officers, you'd have to give me at least a couple minutes to look at policy, or,
2110 just says the vice president fills the vacancy in the presidency, and then it kind of cascades after that, and then it sounds like you'd have to do a special board election for the new VP and.
Ryan, we don't have a vice president currently. So if I didn't show up at this meeting, then what happens? Like, through some unexpected event?
But I think
I've
the
been
best-
through that before, where unfortunately, a board president passed away in office, and that's exactly what, it's a true vacancy.
Right.
Board president is no longer able to be part, and then that's exactly what happened. Vice president ascended to that role temporarily until a new election was held, but the new election was held because of the board president's passing, so, similar but different also.
We've had a
Much more
situation where the
finite.
secretary held a meeting.
What's that?
Chris held a meeting before. When Chris was on the board, she was the secretary, she held a meeting that we were at, Southbury.
I think that's right.
Anybody remember
Forgot
that?
about that,
Yeah.
that's right.
I mean, she stepped in
Yeah.
and did that the one meeting.
So, yeah, I think if you can just find out what our options are as far as what it takes to declare a vacancy or anything, then at least we can make an informed decision at the next meeting. But for me, I mean, as far as meeting on the rest of this committee stuff.
This to me is not pressing. What we're describing now is pressing.
Well, sure, but it can't be resolved until we get legal feedback, so.
Perfect. But again, it's totally fine. It just, to me, needs to be addressed then, because obviously we're at a standstill on making any board changes until we fix this very pressing problem.
How soon would the board like to hold a retreat type meeting, which is a special meeting, so action could be taken. We just have to post the agenda 48 hours in advance and some procedural things, but, so I don't see it happening before the end of the week, but, as early as next week, the week after.
I'll be out of town next week, but if the
You're talking if we need to do special election stuff, or you're talking if we
Should
need
we-
to have a
Just
retreat on the
just
committee
a
stuff?
retreat,
Should we have the
which could
meet-
include that, but by then, I would hope to have some guidance from legal to have a conversation about that too.
I think for me, 2 weeks would probably be enough, but I guess I would look for you to see, because I do think it would be helpful for us to know, because a lot of these committees were being primarily led by an administrator, getting their feedback on what has or hasn't worked and when they think we should be a part of that. I mean, Nicole has called every finance subcommittee meeting, the tech committee meetings were always called by technology people, so I just assume that they have something that they need feedback on. So it'd be nice to know whether they want to be present, and at those meetings, they were always taking notes, they just were never really shared outside that meeting, because it wasn't a public meeting, so it'd be helpful for you guys to have some information, and I think for each of us as board members to maybe take a section of that calendar or something and come prepared to.
Right, and like to your point, Eric, if we have that special meeting and the board convened and we said, hey, we don't like this structure as it is, but we'd like some other things, I'm all for that. I just, like I said, yeah, I'm totally open to those changes, as long as we address the elephant in the room, which is what are we as a district doing moving forward with leadership? So,
Sure.
which it sounds like we're gonna address at the special meeting, so.
So, yeah, 2 weeks. Is that-
August 13th is 2 weeks from today.
Like I said, it's not to pick on Jim,
No,
it's clear that his
right.
absence has pointed out that we
Not at
don't
all.
have a system in place to handle these sorts of extraneous circumstances.
Right.
What is presented, yeah.
Yep.
Will you be able to talk to the lawyer by August 13th?
Oh,
So
I-
we'll
I think
already
so,
know
yeah.
that when we have the meeting.
Yeah. I think
Just
so.
Okay.
charge their extra
okay.
summer hours.
Sounds good.
So is there anything with this meeting, are we going to discuss both the
I think first,
leadership
the thing
issue
we would
as well
discuss is
as
the,
the,
yeah, I think that needs to come first, Alex, is the, what we're gonna do about the leadership issue.
Right.
And then we can brainstorm what we do about, okay, now that we've put that
Retreat.
on the shelf and we've decided that, now we as a board can discuss how do we wanna conduct, because that's ultimately what this is, how do we wanna conduct business as a board going forward, now that we have agreed on the action for leadership.
I agree, so would that be at the same meeting, or,
I mean, it could be. I think that would be a lot, personally. I would feel more comfortable if we just had a single issue, and that would be just addressing how the board I mean, speak up, you know, if anybody feels differently, but I think we need to allow time for response to what our board decides. And if we are workshopping changes at that same meeting, that might be
but
premature. I don't know.
I suppose part of that discussion could be what information does the board review similarly to this, these committee I mean, I'm not saying we need to
Right,
talk
well,
about
and
it,
like
but we
to
can
Eric's
say
point, like we have to
need
pop
this-
the hood on
yeah.
what it is that the role of the board president is, and how we as a board expect that that role be fulfilled, and how we as a board expect that that new position be upheld. And that's essentially the first topic, and that's the direction that I'd be looking for. And then the second topic would be, okay, at the onset of that decision, this is what we will do. If it is this plan, great. If it's a modified version, even better. If it's totally different and this board came up with it, you know, fabulous. So does that make sense? Is that, you feel like good on that?
I would like to discuss the calendar. I think that's a really pertinent.
Probably a
and
primary
this
piece.
Special, yeah, I think that has a lot to do with the board president's duties adhering to set.
I do too. I don't see the board president role as being that as difficult of a discussion as I think as I feel like you're suggesting.
Okay.
Just as far as
Right.
roles and responsibilities, because
No, it's gonna be how we as a board choose to operate, because I think you're gonna find that it is a lot more difficult to operate in this current setting than it would be if we had a different situation, because we don't truly have a vacancy. And you're gonna come to find that, and so it's.
Sure, I get that, but as it relates to the committee stuff, I thought the difficulty we were talking about was getting items on the agenda.
Yeah, right. And again, like the committee stuff to me is a much less important issue than this issue.
Okay.
It just should draw into eyesight. for
What were we
you.
meeting today about though?
Well, and you've now voiced your concerns and addressed the fact that we can't make these decisions without having clearer direction, which is helpful. Am I missing something, or?
So we can tentatively set a special meeting, board retreat for Tuesday, August 13th. I'll get legal guidance in the meantime. If I get that in advance, what I'll probably do is share some of the kind of highlights from that. And we can draft an agenda. And, you know, between now and then, as long as it's 48 hours in advance, but between now and then, we're gonna tweak the agenda a little bit. We have the ability, the board has the ability to do that.
President's issue, the presidency issue, and then the board structure and operation, I think both, do we agree that's what this will be about?
Yep.
Okay.
Right? Is that what you're thinking? Okay.
Just setting that firm foundation before we get to the specifics.
Absolutely.
You're
Right.
saying.
100%, yep.
Okay.
Makes the most sense, right?
Okay.
Tuesday, August 13th is back to school bash from 5 to 7 downtown. And usually we have board retreats at 5:30, but I would suggest we do this one at 7, just so that anybody who wants to go to the back to school bash has the opportunity to do that. And then we'll meet at 7.
Perfect.
Everybody okay with that?
Sounds good.
7 on the 13th.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Anything else for committee reports?
Is that gonna be here at the middle school or?
We just need
TBD?
Yeah, TBD, let me think about the best
Yep.
setting for that. Might be the high school library might be better. Let me think about that.
All right, so seeing no other committee reports, we can move on to the superintendent's report.
Okay. The first item on the superintendent's report is board docs platform update. So the board all knows, and members of the, audience community know that we use software, web-based software called Board Docs to do a lot of the board's work, setting the agendas, publicizing the agendas, publicizing minutes after they're approved. There's a document library. There is a public-facing piece, and then there is a confidential section where personnel-related items are held, which board members have access to, but members of the public don't. We've used Board Docs for many years, and now we're on the verge of moving to a revised or updated platform or version of Board Docs called Community. You're going to hear two terms. Divergent, right, is the name of the company? Diligent, sorry, thank you. Diligent is the name of the company that has created the software that has created Board Docs software. So you hear Diligent, not Virgin. I was thinking of our daughter's favorite books and movies. But you'll also hear Community. And most often, Community is going to refer to the name of this new platform. It's called Community. So it can be a little confusing because we talk a lot about stakeholders and public and our community. But I'm going to turn things over to Kelly. She is newer on this. She's done extensive training with Community. Still picking up some bits and pieces, but I think we're ready to present to the board and to the attendees in terms of what that looks like, so you guys can know what you can expect when we make this transition, which we hope is going to happen by the August 27th meeting. Sorry. With no further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Kelly.
So Steve provided you with a lot of the background information, just that the current Board Docs platform has been around for 22 years, which I think in technology years is like 154 years. And we've been using it for about over 15 years. I started exploring this new platform after I participated in a roundtable discussions with other administrative professionals at the Joint Annual Conference, and learned that Diligent, the parent company, had created this new board management platform, and that eventually this will replace Board Docs. Everybody will eventually have to move to this. We're essentially an early adopter of it with some other larger districts in the state. I worked with our Diligent rep to explore what the new platform would look like and the differences compared to Board Docs. I also explored other options with another board management platform, and after reviewing the capabilities of both the different platforms with Steve and Nick and Nicole, we decided to move forward with Diligent Community. We received access to that on July 11th, and I've been participating in training since then. I wanted to touch on some advantages and features of Community. This is not an exhaustive list by any means, just some of the main upgrades. Some of the advantages of Community is the familiarity. There's going to be less of a learning curve because it is a diligent product, kind of like Board Docs 2.0. There was a significant cost savings by moving to this platform. It has a more modern and a more robust interface for board members, as well as the behind-the-scenes work that I do in it, as well as for our community members. They also have more access to things in this new platform. Some of the other highlights is that there's going to be an easier login for you. It's your district email. So then they'll be doing a single sign-on in the future as well. There is a library update that is a folder format that's similar to Google Drive or Microsoft Office. So you'll have like subfolders, and we'll be able to, it's just easier to look at because it's what we're used to. There is an expanded search feature for the library and also for the agenda minutes, info, and attachments. You can look, filter it down by date ranges that you currently can't do now. There's also a widgets feature. The public can subscribe to receive updates about meetings. There's a request to speak option. And they also have additional things that we can add at future dates. Committees can also be added to this now, which we did not have that capability with Board Docs. So we can add meeting groups and committees for agenda creation, minutes, etc. So if the next slide is kind of what the platform looks like. It's a little bit kind of hard to see there, but it is more modern, and it does provide a ton of information for people to access. And then if you go to the next slide,
Mhm.
that's what the document library looks like. So you can see it has the subfolder features and just the ability, and that's for the public and the board member access. They both are able to do that. So what comes next? As early as after this meeting, this week, we'll be sending instructions and videos to the board to familiarize you with the product, training videos, step-by-step instructions on how to log in. The following week, we are going to begin sending login emails to the board and to the district leadership team, and begin using the new Diligent Community platform for the August 27th meeting. I just wanted to remind everybody that this is a learning process for all of us, and so adjustments and tweaks will be made as we become more familiar with the capabilities of this new platform. Does anybody have any questions?
I noticed Diligent Board has an app. Like, is that,
You
will we be
can
able to use
access it
that?
from any
Okay.
device.
Cause like I would tell you on at least on an iPad, like Word Docs is not really into it. Like,
Right, so it's going
not
to,
great.
it
So we
will
could
adjust
actually
to
use
whatever
that.
device you're on.
Yeah, much better. I mean, not that I can't navigate it here, but it's not the easiest.
No.
So, no, that's great. Sounds like a great enhancement.
Saving money, that's always good.
Yes, I thought so too.
I think the big request I would have is to consider whether we move like eventually all district-related, community-accessible documents to that platform. Because right now we've there's some stuff there, I don't know if it's as much intended to be the community-facing side, but then we've got stuff that's on the website, like CAFRs are on there, other state reports we have to provide. Like, is there a way that we can just consolidate that all so the public knows you need a file about the district, here's the one place you go, and you're not trying to figure out, oh wait, is that part of human resources, business offices, I gotta go over here. I've just encountered that even going to other districts' pages, like, all right, there's Google Drive here, there's all this, just.
I could see even like a link tree, honestly, without even moving it, like if you just had even something that just pointed, even if it points back to the website, just like.
Right, yeah, one should still point back to the other, so the links can stay on.
Yeah, right, they don't have to like move.
But I just assume it'd be easier for whoever's maintaining everything to just put it in one place.
I really like the subscribe feature you
Yeah,
were
that's
talking about, like, been a long time proponent of trying to get this room more full, or at least having more people participate. How exactly does that work, and what information would get sent out, and how does that look?
So, the public can subscribe to, it receives the agendas. So
Okay.
when the agendas are released,
Basically the same emails we get on
Mhm.
Fridays or whatever, saying
Yeah,
a
it's
meeting's
slightly
been made
different,
current,
yeah.
they get something
Yeah.
like that.
For, in terms of like memos and like we were talking, like we get our weekly updates right now through email. Is there an opportunity for those weekly updates to be, and those are particularly just specific to our board, because a lot of it's private. Is there a way to, is there like a vessel for that? So it now would be through board docs?
go out to the public, or
No,
for
no,
just your,
just for the,
your
like,
normal
for the
updates?
internal board purposes.
There could be that option, we could discuss how you could do that, whether
Yeah.
it's like a folder with those
Mhm.
updates are
Like an
kept in.
announcement section, is there something like that?
Right, we could create.
Just to make it easier to organize,
In the
too.
document library,
'Cause now I have to like sift through different emails and there's like,
Right.
you know, it's kind of, it's
so you
clunky.
could create, a folder in the document library in the internal section of it that is strictly for, weekly board updates.
Well, and like, if you think too, if we have this upcoming election, new board members, all the weekly updates that our current board members have through email would not be accessible by new board members. So that's something that I think would be valuable. It's just having our weekly updates go to board docs. Do you guys
Yeah.
think that's a good idea? Yes, maybe
Just for historical purposes.
Just for
yeah.
his-
And in an ease to get back. I mean, otherwise you're filing them away in a folder or going back through a trash or whatever, however your method is.
And like you
Sure.
mentioned, Chris, running a meeting, I mean, I could have dug for that, but I could also now with the weekly update, I mean, some of that information in a weekly update is available that isn't in, some other accessible format, so now it would be essentially.
Sure.
Okay. Yeah, that's awesome, I'm very excited. Okay. Well, then the, next item on the agenda is the, resolution to direct the regional superintendent of schools for the county of, let's see, let me read this right. Sorry, the action item on our agenda is to approve the resolution directing the regional superintendent of schools for the county of DeKalb, Illinois, to certify the county clerk of said county the question of, and I'm reading this aloud to clarify, of imposing a retailer's occupation tax and service occupation tax to be used exclusively for school facility purposes, school resource officers, and mental health professionals for submission to the electors of said county at the general election to be held on the 5th day of November 2024. That is the recommended action. Surmising it for people watching, this is not to impose a sales tax, this is a vote to decide if this should go on the November ballot for voters to decide. Do I have that right?
Yep,
Okay.
absolutely right.
So that's the recommended action.
It's whether our board supports it going on the ballot, but it could still end up on there even if we didn't.
Right,
and
yes,
vice
it's a
versa.
good clarifying question, yes. Yeah, or point, I should say.
So
That's
I-
the recommended action.
So I didn't put together the presentation that the board has seen a couple of times already. That includes information from PMA. I did create a couple of highlights here. We've discussed this as far back as January. I don't like the idea of a new tax, but the revenue, would generate some revenue for, primarily for facilities. There are exemptions to the 1% tax. You guys know what those are. Almost everything related to agriculture,
Medicine.
medicine,
groceries.
medications, groceries, unprepared food, so groceries, prepared food at a restaurant, the 1% would be applied to that. There are a lot of exemptions, we talked about that before.
Things you license like autos,
Mhm.
planes, boats, trailers.
Motorcycles,
Yeah.
you got it. And I think one of the selling points, and I didn't necessarily know this when we started the conversation, is that the majority of this tax would be paid by people who do not own property in DeKalb County. 42% of purchases made in DeKalb County are made by people who live outside of DeKalb County altogether. Of the 58 remaining percent, not all of those people own property. So majority of this sales tax would be paid by people who aren't currently paying property taxes. Can be used for pay-as-you-go building upgrades, to sell bonds for larger projects, or to abate property taxes. We had a conversation about that at the last meeting. Could the district make a commitment that annually there is some abatement? And I think there was even a suggestion that it's a specific amount, moving forward. If it goes on the ballot, we can certainly have that conversation. I don't know that I would have a good idea in terms of a percentage or a flat amount right now. But I do think the discussion of abatement as a result of receiving 1% sales tax revenue would be a good thing for the board and the district to do annually if it's put on the ballot and approved. And lastly, as Michael indicated, if the board approves the resolution, it only puts it on the ballot. One of the questions we talked about last time was, where's the public on this? The vote is their opportunity to tell you where they're at with this. Right now, the board is just voting to put it on the agenda, or on the ballot in November. And as Eric mentioned, just because Sycamore puts it on the ballot doesn't mean that everybody, doesn't mean that it's gonna go on the ballot, because you need school districts that represent at least 50% of the student enrollment in DeKalb County to approve the same resolution that we're seeing tonight. 3 other districts have approved it, but they're all smaller districts that only amount to about 12% of the student enrollment in DeKalb County. So, just puts it on the ballot for the voters to have their say. And I talked about the 3 districts that have already unanimously approved it. That's just highlights. We've had this discussion before. I'm glad to answer any additional questions that you guys have. I'll take any questions or open it up for discussion.
Has it been asked and answered in the past, or do you know if it hasn't? Has any district encountered issues with enacting this tax and having it affect their evidence-based funding receipts? I couldn't find anything in the formula to suggest that this would be a consideration, but it was also pretty mute about it.
Totally separate, because every school district, every public school district receives funding through the EDF formula, but not all school districts in the state receive revenue through the 1% because the
Right,
county's-
I just didn't know if it showed up as a local resource then that made you look more adequate, because suddenly you have
No.
more tax receipts than you had.
It doesn't impact EDF, and, one of the questions that I've encountered in the past was whether or not bonds that are sold using 1% revenue, as the payback, does that impact the district's debt service capacity? And it does not. It's totally separate, because it's a separate, revenue stream to pay off those bonds.
I think it's also my understanding from reading that the county board at any time could decide with the majority of the county board to put the measure back on the ballot to be removed without consent of the school districts. Are you aware of that? Am I correct in that understanding?
I would wanna double check that. Originally, the county board was the only body that could put it on the agenda, or put it on the ballot. School districts had to request that the county board, discussed it. I do know that there is still a role the county board could put it on. Doesn't have to be school districts, it could still be the county board. I don't know off the top of my head, whether or not the county board could vote to remove it. I would need to double check that.
Do we know if DeKalb is considering the SRO mental health stipulation or not? Because I guess if we approve with and then they approve without, I don't know what would happen in that instance.
My understanding is that all school districts who are considering it are considering the resolution that does include the SRO and the mental health professionals.
Just before we vote, the one thing I'd like to put out there is, in my opinion, I'd like to see a commitment from the district on what the money would be used for, to including that long-range facility plan we discussed. Before I would support doing anything with this new revenue stream, if approved, besides abating property taxes. I think that's a commitment I'd like to see in the district's end before the money is spent, if it were to pass.
Is there any other discussion?
No, I've got the discussion, I was waiting to let everybody else ask the questions. I've been doing a lot of thinking about this, and I know I've brought up my hesitations at previous meetings, so I'll just kind of reiterate those in my final stand here. I have a lot of issues, obviously, with our current tax situation. I don't think that there's anybody in the county who would come forth and say, yay, we need more taxes. 8.25% sales tax, 5% state tax, real estate taxes that are through the roof. And I know we received some letters from concerned constituents today, so I have my doubts that this would even pass if it got on there. But just as a board member and a representative of the community, I struggle to support adding additional taxation to our district. I think the initiative that we as a community need to take on is really with our downstate representatives and with the Illinois State Board of Education. Have a lot of issues as I've been digging through the numbers for the last couple weeks on just the evidence-based funding formula and how dollars are being distributed throughout our county. As you're all aware, we are a tier 1 school, and low numbers or high rankings is not a good place to be on that state funding. That basically puts Sycamore as the quote furthest from adequacy in the county, or at least in that category where we share that position with one other school. We're the only district in the county since FY19, which was the oldest data I could quickly pull down, that has gotten into a worse ranking than where we started. The funding, if you just look, and it's hard not to compare us to DeKalb, and I get that there are different demographic concerns there that affect the state funding formula, but when you look at our livelihoods and how we are going to sustain an educational environment over the next couple of decades against our closest partner when we have to compete with them for teaching resources, for residents moving into our county, for businesses, us having to share a higher burden of that taxation is not going to serve Sycamore's best interests. And that's my concern. If you look at FY19 through FY24, again, the longest set of data I could quickly grab off of the state's website, state funding for Sycamore has increased about 15% over that time. So 5-ish, six fiscal years, 15% more revenue coming from the state share of educational funding. DeKalb has gone up 78%. 78%.
Does that, do you know off the top of your head if that includes they get a pretty substantial grant that essentially buys down their property tax rate?
It does include that.
Okay.
Yeah. So basically the state is reducing everybody's property taxes there, but not doing the same in Sycamore. So I do consider that in part of the total revenue. And if we receive the same support per student as DeKalb did in Sycamore, the same number of dollars per head, I get that they're twice our size, but just dollars per head, we could have our $90 million high school facility improvement plan done in about 5.6 years. That's the magnitude of the disparity, and it's not just DeKalb. I've got numbers on other districts in our county as well. And I know there were people complaining that Sycamore has an issue and we're the ones that are somehow spending recklessly, and I dove into numbers on that too, and I can assure you that from an instructional cost standpoint, operational cost standpoint, we're in the bottom half of all schools in our county. We spend money way more efficiently, have the leanest administration. So we're doing all the things that we can as a board, and I don't feel like the state is helping us out in this matter. And so to go to half of our taxpayers at least, or 58%, and say, we're gonna make it harder to shop here because we need to support some buildings, I just don't think that sends the right message to our constituents. I think it alleviates the state of their responsibility to properly fund school districts. Because they're gonna look at that and go, well, there's another $2 million, now we don't have to, we dodged a bullet there, we don't have to deal with the problem that we've got. I'm worried that it becomes an unpredictable source of revenue if it does turn out, in fact, that the county board could decide down the road that maybe the majority of them don't support it, and they've got the ability every single election to keep throwing it out there to get it pulled away from us. And now we've come up with a facilities replacement plan counting on its revenue, and then it disappears. So those are my reasons that I struggle to support implementing this tax. I just think it sets a bad precedent, and I completely agree that we desperately need these funds to keep our school buildings operating at the level that our community expects, and quite frankly, that the average person should expect. And I don't know how we're gonna come up with that fund, and even this only scratches the surface of really addressing that problem anyway. We still have a mountain of a mountain to get over to get that funding. This is just the tree at the top of that you now don't have to scale, but just wanted to share my thoughts.
Any other discussion? Okay, is there a motion to approve the resolution as proposed?
So moved.
It's moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Kelly, would you call the roll?
Grados,
Yes.
Jones,
No.
Shiloh,
Yes.
Evans,
Yes.
DeVito,
No.
motion carries.
Okay, so the next item on the agenda is the transfer tax. Discussion on the transfer tax.
Yes, I would like to see that struck down, actually, because it's not serving the purpose for what it was originally, instituted for. In other words, for the Heron Creek properties, and now they're taxing commercial properties and businesses with it, and it was originally, instituted to bring in revenue from houses that were being built in Heron Creek.
That's a little misleading.
Is it?
Only from the standpoint of the transfer tax was enacted in 2006, at a time when Sycamore was experiencing rapid growth. Heron Creek was part of that, but you had
Okay.
resident ponds going on, you had Sycamore Creek. There were a number of subdivisions going in, so it wasn't targeted at that specific group of people and then subsequently expanded. This applied countywide, and it was to address the fact that as new buildings, as new homes were being put in, it was creating a new burden on the school district, which is why we had to build North Grove Elementary, and if I'm missing history, although I don't think anybody else is, maybe Mark in the back knows more. The problem is when new houses go in, there's almost a 3-year lag between when that property gets built and when you actually see the tax revenue that we've been talking about from that house. And especially when you're talking a bunch of family homes up there where you're bringing in 1-2 kids maybe per household, you suddenly have to build a school and you're waiting 3 years before you even see additional tax revenue to help pay for it. So that's my understanding as to why the transfer tax was implemented in 2006, was to help shore up that gap and make sure that we could build the facilities that we needed to meet that demand. I wasn't part of that discussion. I moved here in 2006, so I was probably one of the first people to get to pay it. But it does get us, and from that time, it was also assessed on commercial properties. So anytime a commercial property changes hands, it's assessed. Anytime somebody who lives outside of Sycamore purchases a single family home or a piece of real estate in Sycamore, they pay it. If you're purchasing a unit, even if you live in Sycamore and you're purchasing it not as a primary residence, you will pay it as well. So my issues, I guess, with it, and I agree with you, is that over the last 18 years that it's been there, I don't think that the original reason that it was implemented necessarily exists anymore. We've seen growth drastically get scaled back, and I'm not ready to suggest anything at this meeting, because I would like more data on what we're looking at for new home construction, how this plays into impact fees, because in my mind, if the original goal was to address the fact that new homes generate new demand on school districts, then why isn't this fee considered as part of the impact fees? Why aren't we rethinking impact fees instead of saying, hey, anybody that wants to bring your business to Sycamore, we're gonna slap you with a 0.5% tax. Hey, anybody that wants to take a job at one of these new factories going into Cal, wants to move to Sycamore, hey, we're gonna hit you with a 0.5% extra tax.
That's what I don't like, because it prevents business growth, I believe, and that's why I think that it's not good.
Especially on the commercial side, where we are then trying to work with DCEDC to say, hey, we're gonna set up an economic development zone, and we're gonna abate your taxes, so we charged you 0.5%, but now we're gonna abate everything back to you.
Yeah, it just doesn't seem right. and maybe even a little bit corrupt.
So, just to, impact fees are paid by developers, right?
Correct, and then in theory passed on to the
And-
person purchasing the home.
Yeah, and then the transfer tax. If I buy a house and I live in St. Charles, so I'm moving into Sycamore, the house was built in 1890, I still pay the tax on that
Correct.
regardless of the year of construction.
Every
And
time that
regardless-
house changes
Yeah.
ownership, if it's changing to somebody who didn't live in Sycamore,
Mhm.
and I don't know what the time frame is on that, I don't know if it's currently lives in Sycamore, or if there's some window of opportunity there, it gets reassessed. So yeah, the same property could have a transfer tax applied to it an infinite number of times.
Mhm.
That's,
So, I mean, I think we have two issues here then, that we maybe need to discuss. Are you just wanting to discuss the transfer tax or the transfer tax sort of impact fee?
both then.
Okay.
If it's being done unfairly, I don't think that's fair, because it wasn't, I mean,
Well, it's been a while since we looked at impact fees. In my history on the board, going back 12 years now, we've never really looked at the transfer tax. In fact, I think it was only brought up a few years ago that it could, that the statute allows either the city of Sycamore or the Board of Education to terminate that with just written notification to the other party. I'm not suggesting any action, and we can't take any action tonight, but I think it would be helpful on a future agenda to look at impact fees, transfer tax fees, and just understand what's all at play. Could we make changes to the impact fee structure that would meet the original intent, as I
yes.
perceive it, of the transfer tax, so that we can eliminate that as a burden on businesses, you know, and other transactions, while still being able to support the needs that a growing community could have if we're gonna have to expand in the future.
Well, I guess the other
Right.
thing, Sycamore is no longer, it's not growing at the pace it was growing.
It's not, but nowhere is, but
Yeah.
the demand is potentially there. I mean, DCEDC has given presentations in the past few years talking about potentially 1,000 new jobs a year going in along the I-88
Mhm.
corridor. And I think they had suggested, or maybe it was I that hypothesized, but if half of those jobs stay in DeKalb County, that's 500, and if half of those come to Sycamore versus DeKalb, that's 250 new people looking for a place to live every year, and we don't have the inventory for that. So it's either gonna get built, or they're gonna be commuting from a very long distance away that I'm not aware of anywhere. I mean, this is a nationwide housing crisis, so. If we're going to build, and if we want to be a place where we can at least spread out some of this tax burden on additional properties, then we want to be an attractive place for people to come. We already have high property values, which doesn't help, and adding another 0.5% tax that they kind of get surprised on at closing time, also isn't necessarily helping.
Could we compare to our competing districts of Kingland, DeKalb, Rochelle, except Genoa, Kingston, to see if those cities all have similar ordinances?
I'm not aware of anybody else that has
Oh.
a transfer tax.
I'm not either.
That's both the transfer tax and an impact fee
Oh, everybody has an impact fee.
to the same, but also the amount, you know.
That-
Like, is it 10 times what it is here in Kankville, or is it half? I mean, just to get some perspective would be helpful.
I can do a little bit of research, and we did talk about this spring. I put together just some brief, high-level information. And I think that there are some nuances there. You know, the impact fee is for something new that
Right.
ideally, you know, or in theory, somebody, a new family or an individual moving to the community. Transfer, I think, is different. You know, the same property can get taxed multiple times, so I think that kind of the perspective is different, and the revenue that it generates is different as well. Lastly, if I remember correctly, I think it's the transfer tax that only goes to the school district, but the impact fee is split between other taxing bodies.
That should be correct.
So we would need to make sure we've got that straight too. So one of those, and again, I think it's the transfer tax. The school district can initiate that conversation or that communication with the city. But the other one, which I believe is the impact fee, other taxing bodies receive revenue from that. So that's not just a school district decision. So there are some nuances there.
But I think that we help dictate what those, the magnitude of those impact fees, if I recall. Because I know we had a discussion when we restructured all of that, but that's been, I don't know, 10 years? That was one of my first few years on the board, we looked at all that.
I can gather a little bit more
So
information.
that's why it'd just be nice to make a future agenda item, I think, so we can dive into some of this stuff a
Right,
little bit.
can we look into both of them? I don't even understand the impact fee at all.
The impact fee is a tax that's assessed by the city when you go to develop a new piece of land. And it's meant to be split, as Steve said, amongst varying taxing bodies, because there's an impact to that development. You have to build out electric, you know, all the
Oh,
utility
okay.
stuff, all the roads like that. All that affects the city, and you can't just build suddenly 200 homes and expect that the city's got a few $1 million to quickly throw in all this infrastructure. So that's my
Yeah.
Yeah.
high-level
that-
understanding of
That's
that,
my
and I could be way off
understanding,
base,
too.
but.
Yeah, and
That
it-
would make sense if
Mhm.
it's a one-time. I have a problem with people being taxed
But
over and
that-
over again, and then it discourages business growth. And people already have enough trouble finding jobs right now, so I would like to see the other one eliminated, actually.
well, impact fee is only residential dwellings, or is it?
I don't know.
I thought it was just 1 bedroom, maybe it's even 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom.
It's
4
assessed
bedroom,
based on the size of the home.
Yeah, so I think it's
Or
just.
number of bedrooms, but I don't know if there's an impact fee for commercial or not.
I think that would be helpful too, like
Yeah.
what taxes do we impose on commercial development?
Yep, I can look that up, I can make it a future agenda item.
Okay. So then, just pull it. Is there any further comment on the transfer tax? All right, so then, let's see, that should be an open discussion, right? Anything for open discussion? Future agenda items?
Well, funny enough, I was thinking perhaps a special board meeting for goal setting for 2024-2025 superintendent, but that might be part of our executive session tonight, but if it's not, I think that's something we should do sooner than later. We're already into the fiscal year, so.
Is there any other discussion? All right, so seeing no further discussion, is there a motion to move into executive session?
So moved, Jim?
Second.
All right, moved and seconded. Roll call?
Jones,
Yes.
Shiloh,
Yes.
Evans,
Yes.
Grados,
Yes.
Kavita,
Yes.
motion carried.